reading from the work Divine Providence, from the chapter on the laws of permission. The worshiper of self and the worshiper of nature can confirm themselves against divine providence when they see impious people raised to positions of honor, becoming great men, prelates, abounding in wealth and riches and living in luxury and magnificence, while worshippers of God are held in contempt and live in poverty. The worshiper of self and of nature believes that advancements in riches are the highest and the only sources of happiness, and thus the only real sources of happiness which are possible. If, from having been initiated into worship in early childhood, that person gives thought to God, they call those things divine blessings which have to do with riches. And as long as they do not inspire them too deeply, they may believe in God, that He exists, and worship Him. But concealed within that worship, something of which they themselves may be unaware, is an ambition to be raised higher than God, to positions of advancement and still greater riches. And if they attain them, then their worship recedes more and more in outward appearances until it slips away, and at last the person has little regard for God and finally denies God. He does the same if he should lose the advancement and wealth upon which he has set his heart. Now, when such advancements and riches to the evil, are they not stumbling blocks? They can be, but not, however, to the good, because they do not set their heart upon them, but on useful services or good endeavors. For the performance of such advancements and for the riches, these then serve as a means. Consequently, the advancement of impious people to positions of honor and wealth and their becoming great men and prelates can only lead someone who is a worshiper of self and nature to confirm themselves against the divine providence. Further, what is a greater or lesser position or advancement, or a greater and lesser worth? What is it? It is not in itself something that exists only in the mind. Is one person any more fortunate or happier than another because of their advances in riches? In the case of great men, indeed, in the case of a king or an emperor, does he not regard his position after a year's time only as something ordinary, which no longer exhilarates his heart with joy for the position only of itself? Do they derive from their positions a greater degree of happiness than those who are in a lesser position? In these, indeed, those who are of very little stature, such as farmers and also their servants. The latter, these farmers and servants, may be in a greater degree of happiness when things are going well for them and they are content with their lot. What is more disquieted at heart, more often irate, and more often deeply angered than the love of self? This is the case as often as not is seen in those who are honored according to the exhilaration of their heart, and when their exhilaration of their heart is not honored and their love of self is not admired, then they become angry and bitter. All right. The laws of permission are also the laws of divine providence. Those numbers, 235, 274, contain a whole bunch. I counted 23 different things that are relative to the permissions that the Lord allows that can get us stuck in reflecting on, why does the Lord allow that? And I read one of them. I don't know if any of you made any connection between what I was reading and current affairs. We can't make spiritual judgments about anyone, but my country of origin right now is impeaching their president. Or they're not impeaching, right? They're trying. They're doing the trial part. I guess it's the same thing. And it hurts. Wow. I'm really affected by just the pain of the United States going through this process. Enough people having enough reason to believe, and I haven't been following it in deep detail at all, but just looking back and thinking, wow, when I was a kid, the Watergate scandal, and there was actually an article about some of the other scandals that have happened, and the world is never released of scandals, which is why it's in the section on divine providence about, it mentions emperors and kings, well, presidents, vice presidents, prime ministers, etc. It's of divine providence, or of the permissions of divine providence, that people get elevated to positions. And then when something happens, such as what's happening now, enough people say we have to look into this to make an assessment concerning the suitability of an officer of the government, or could happen in the church, it could happen in civil leadership, in schools, etc. Anywhere, people just get looked at and scrutinized and judged. The laws of permission are also laws of divine providence. The Lord allows all sorts of things to happen that, if I were in charge of the world, I might not let those things happen. But of course, thank the Lord, I'm not. So I want to go through the list. I don't want to stop and reflect on every one of them. I have sort of a three-part presentation ready. I don't know how far I'll get through it, because I do want to encourage anybody to stop and ask questions about what we're talking about. But one is concerning these laws that are related to permissions. The second has to do with civil order and social order, and that in the work of Doctrine of Charity, it mentions that 8 things ought to be in order for there to be order in society. And I'm going to talk a little bit about them and how they correlate with at least 4 of the 10 Commandments. And then finally, a couple passages from the Arcana Celestia concerning the Lord's greatest temptation, wondering, would there be anyone to receive what he gave his life for? And it's connected in that it was of his providence that he had to let things come down to a very thin thread holding together heaven and earth. And in fact, that thread was at such a point that it was broken at the time the Lord came and at the time the Lord was allowing himself to be crucified. And he permitted that. He permitted things to get so bad that if he hadn't come, if he hadn't gone through everything he had gone through, if he hadn't foreseen all of it, and if he hadn't prepared his own states to allow for all of what happened to his body and mind, that if he hadn't done all of that, allowing himself to die, no one could have been saved. So that puts it, in one sense, it puts it in perspective that we all must be born again. You don't have the new birth without the death of the old. And there's several parables in the Lord talking about that greater love has no one than to give your life. And giving our lives, spiritually speaking, is the process by which the Lord regenerates us. I was wearing my poppy today, and somebody noted that. And I thought, wow, we stand in time. Today, of course, I'm talking about, distractions. About the, sorry, can't do 3 things at once. Voila. I guess I got to keep wiggling that around. Talking about the impeachment process right now. In 10 days or so in the United States, it's Thanksgiving. We've had our Thanksgiving. And about 10 days ago, we had Remembrance Day. So this November is, in one sense, a powerful month. Not that they were planning out the impeachment. Oh, they probably were planning it out for this time of year, right? Yeah, because of the elections. I don't want to focus too much on the politics and the natural things, but you think about the divine providence and the laws of divine providence, and oftentimes it can be an ethereal, well, the interesting stuff, but how does it apply to my life? Or Or how do I look at the world around me and see how these laws are important? Some things enumerated that belong to permission and yet are in accord with the laws of divine providence by which a merely natural person confirms themselves in favor of nature against God and in favor of human prudence against divine providence. So that whole section, 236 to 240, are just excuses that we can have. And so judge yourself. See, have you thought this way yourself? Have you had these questions? Have you had these concerns that, well, if the Lord was really in charge, why would these things in the Word that are mentioned? So the first ones are, some things from the Word. Adam and Eve, they allowed themselves to be seduced by a serpent. God did not avert this by his divine providence. How many times have our kids, at least, teaching, well, why did the Lord let them do that? Well, why did the Lord put the serpent there in the first place? Couldn't the Lord see that this was going to happen? Second, Cain killed Abel. God did not withhold him at the time by speaking with him, but only after the deed, cursing him. Now that's not fair. The Lord saw it coming. Why didn't he say, hey, Cain, just calm down. Of course, then we know these are people that are representative of whole communities, if not whole nations of the most ancient church. And why didn't the Lord avert them somehow? Because of permission, we're allowed to do these things. The Jewish Israelite nation worshipped the golden calf in the wilderness, acknowledged it as the God who led them out of the land of Egypt, and yet Jehovah saw this from Mount Sinai nearby and did not seek to prevent it. And you can look at these things and go, the Lord's supposed to be our Heavenly Father, and He's just letting us run in traffic. All right? David numbered the people, and in consequence a plague was set upon them, by which so many thousands of men perished. And God, not before, but after the deed, sent Gad the prophet to David and denounced punishment upon him. So a lot of these just setups. It looks like they're setups. Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, the Israelite nation. The Lord's setting these people up to fall. That's what it looks like. And that's why it's basically saying, how do you respond? Do you think the Lord sets you up somehow? You look back and go, oh my goodness, why didn't the Lord give me the insight I have now back then? Many kings after Solomon were permitted to profane the temple and the holy things of the church. The nation was permitted to crucify the Lord. So those are just 7 things taken from the Word, stories from the Word, where you can go, that's not fair. That's not right. That's not divine providence. So second, there are some other things that our minds incline towards thinking. And you don't think the Lord's just listing these things in the second coming in the work of divine providence so we can look back historically and go, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. Now apply this to your own life. Look at how those things, spiritually speaking, are about you and about me. I'll take care of me, you take care of you. Some things seen in the world. Every worshiper of himself and of nature confirms himself against the divine providence when, and that's the beginning line of each one of these several paragraphs, confirming yourself against divine providence. So you can say, when I'm in a state where I'm the most important thing in the world, therefore I'm the worshiper of self, and I look around at the way nature is, and I think, yeah, this is all running pretty smoothly. I'll see in the world so many impious persons, so many of their impieties, and at the same time, the glorying of some of them in these impieties, and yet no punishment of such by God. And then the paragraph I read in full in 250. You see the impious exalted to honors and to high offices in church and state, abounding in wealth and living in luxury and magnificence, while you see the worshipers of God despised and poor. Do you ever shake your fist at God and go, like Tevye, why, would it hurt some vast eternal plan if I were made a wealthy man? Come on, God, work with me here. I would do so nicely with a lot more money. You can confirm yourself as a worshiper of self and of nature by looking at the wars that are permitted. Now, this was written during Swedenborg's time, so the literal sense related to the wars just seemed like Europe was fighting at least every other year, right? 100-year war, 120-year war, war this nation and that nation. And then as time has passed from that point on, you think about the American Revolution, you think about the Canadian Rebellion of 1837, not as significant in many ways. We think about all the different wars, especially the First and Second World War. Again, going back to Remembrance Day. Why'd the Lord let so many people suffer and die? Because the Lord couldn't have stopped it and not caused something worse to have taken place. We reflect upon our perception that victories are on the side of prudence and sometimes not on the side of justice, and that it makes no difference whether the commander is an upright person or not, upright man. So the first two categories, one from the Word, you can confirm yourself against divine providence by these stories from the Word, and a lot other ones are given in other places in the writings. And then by just observing things out in the political world. Third, you can look at the religious conditions of various people, and it says the natural, merely natural, or you, when you're in a natural state, can confirm yourself against the divine providence when you consider the religious conditions of various people, that there are some who are totally ignorant of God, and some who worship the sun and moon, and some who worship idols and graven images. Can't the Lord get the message to them? No, they're left in ignorance. When you see the Mohammedan religion accepted by so many empires and kingdoms, and the teachings of the new church in the literal sense is not politically correct. Get to that at the very bottom. When you see the Christian religion accepted only in smaller divisions of the habitable globe called Europe, and is there divided, the fact that so many kingdoms where the Christian religion is accepted, there are some who claim for themselves divine power and wish to be worshipped as God, and that the dead are invoked. So the Lord's leading Swedenborg, with his own experience of the religious world, the world of the Word, or the stories of the Word, his understanding of politics, to pull out these things that would get our attention and help us with whatever argument we have. So if you've got an argument against divine providence that occurs to you once in a while, see how it meshes with this, and I'd like you to talk about that if something comes to you. Whoopsie. Number 16. Those who profess the Christian religion, there are some who place salvation in certain phrases, which they should think and talk about, making no account of the good works they should do. So 15, talking about the Catholic Church primarily. 14, talking about Gentile religions in terms of, or Christian religion, but it's how it's divided. The Muslim religion, Gentiles in 12, the Muslims in 13, certain Christians in 14, the Catholic Church especially in 15, and the Protestant Church especially in 16. Why would the Lord permit all those churches and all those people to divide up the worship and love of the Lord and ruin it? Whoop, sorry again. 17, the fact that there have been and still are so many heresies in the Christian world, such as Quakerism, Moravianism, from which Benet came, Anabaptists, Baptists, and others. The list goes on and on. I don't even know if there is an official number of Christian denominations. If there is, that's going to be different tomorrow. And the fact that Judaism still continues. People will confirm themselves against the Lord because if the Lord really was the Messiah, God, wouldn't he have wiped out the Jews who crucified him? Wouldn't that have been the right thing to do? I mean, look at all the other people he wiped out. Page 4. And fourth, finally, again, these clumping together of things you can experience or see in the world of politics, see in the world of religion, see in the Word itself. Finally, the fourth thing things relating to the Christian doctrine. A doubt may arise in opposition to the divine providence from the fact that the whole Christian world worships one God under three persons, which is to worship three gods, not knowing hitherto that God is one in person and essence, in whom is a Trinity, and that the Lord is that God. Why didn't the Lord make that so clear? You ever questioned that? Why can't I talk to my friends about religion and just tell them, well, you're misunderstanding that? And they go, no, me and about 1 billion other people? And why do you think you and your tiny little religion have it right? Oh, maybe that comes up with number 20. Up until now, people have not known that there is a spiritual sense in all the particulars of the Word, and that its holiness is therefrom, from the spiritual sense. So now we're getting into the Lord telling us, people doubt divine providence because I didn't come sooner or differently in the second coming than I did. That's what this is saying. And we can often turn that to or inside of ourselves by saying, wow, this new church I belong to, the Lord really did it. He didn't do it right. Divine providence really wasn't working right. Or this would so easily be explained and understood by everybody else. They haven't known that there's a spiritual sense. Well, as soon as you tell them, won't they all flock to the new church? Obviously, the providence of the Lord is not working. And finally, number 21 of these many things you can pull up in your mind, all of which are representative of other things spiritually and celestially even, or demonically and satanically, infused into our thinking. The spiritual sense of the word has not been revealed before. Because if it had been, the church would have profaned it and thereby have profaned the essential holiness of the word. And this is an interesting last paragraph because it's really not like the other ones. It's really an explanation of a lot of why all those other things were permitted, could be permitted. The Lord brought the world to a state, as I sort of said, dangling from one thin thread before spiritual destruction. If the Lord had not come, and as we're preparing for the Christmas season, thinking about what is the Lord's advent to us, what is the second advent to us, if the Lord had not come, all flesh of the earth would be lost. If the Lord hadn't sent John the Baptist to tell people, stop, change, even if they only did it externally and only heard that the Messiah was coming, there would have been a curse and a pestilence that would have wiped out the people that the Lord wanted to reach. Yes?
That makes it seem like there can't be profanation today. It makes it sound like, but we can still profane.
Yes.
It makes it sound like, well, they were done profaning, so then, I don't quite understand. It's just interesting.
Yeah, the number to 21. Yeah, it would have been even worse. It would have, and again, it's you wouldn't really reflect on that unless you knew the second coming had been made, unless you were reading this book and going, oh, well, here these teachings are. The Arcana has been written by this point. A lot of the other works have been written. The spiritual sense of the word has not been revealed before, okay, but now it has. Because if it had been, the church would have profaned it. So it's not really in the same way of thinking. It's just sort of saying, well, even we who now have received the teachings of the new church can go, I'm not sure I believe in divine providence. Look, he's given all this material, all this good stuff about the spiritual sense. Thereby would have been profaned and the essential holiness of the word would have been corrupted. Well, I don't believe that. And you can read 264 and see how a better explanation of it. Each one of these 22 paragraphs has pages that go with it. Finally, the genuine truths in which the spiritual sense of the word reside were not revealed by the Lord until the last judgment had been accomplished, and the new church that is meant by the Holy Jerusalem was about to be established by the Lord. And again, that's one of those ones, well, I wouldn't know anything about that to deny divine providence unless I were exposed to the new church. So these apply to us. These last couple of paragraphs really apply to the way we can look at the growth of the church or the lack of growth of the church or the nature of the writings and how maybe we don't really get that much out of it so much anymore, or if we ever did or we struggle with it, we think, wow, the Lord, he could have done it differently or better. Why didn't he? Oh, I thought I stopped there, but look at that, I found some more. A doubt may arise in opposition to divine providence from the fact that hitherto men have not known that to shun evils as sins is the Christian religion itself. We know that. Shun evils as sins against God. And the Lord didn't let that be known to others more quickly? Well, He did, but why did people not believe it? No, because divine providence isn't really at work. And finally, a doubt may arise in opposition to divine providence from the fact that it has not hitherto been known that a man lives as a man after death, and that this has not been disclosed before. So these last ones are all about we in the new church can look at the things that we've been given and think the Lord's not really at work. We can doubt the Lord's providence. So I want to pause because that section out of divine providence, I thought I had 22, and I guess I couldn't count my own numbers. 24 paragraphs simply telling us ways in which we can make up arguments against the Lord. Make up arguments against the way He provides for us. Make up reasons why we can doubt that His providence is really at work. Is it consoling to see all those 24 paragraphs? Does it feel good to know they're all there? Does it bother you? Does it depress you? Do you have no response at all? Jared?
I think on the whole it's a little comforting to see that the Lord acknowledges those objections.
No, I didn't place him in the audience to give the right answer, but yeah, that's the great answer, Jared. That's what I think too. Is there something struggle that you've gone through where you look and you go, "Oh, the Lord really wasn't taking care of me"? And sometimes we can be in that state right now and think, "Is the Lord really, really providing for me?" And maybe an argument coming up related to this or that thing here in these 24 paragraphs or 24 headings connects with you around that. And this doesn't even go into diseases, natural catastrophes, and accidents, etc., which are covered in another section, talked about in divine providence, but in other parts of the Word. There is a great study I read through Bishop. Now, he wasn't a bishop in 1971, but Peter Buss did a series of 4 articles on the laws of divine providence, especially related to the laws of permission, and talks a lot about diseases. Also in Hugo Oedner's book, The Spiritual World, and also in his book, Spirits and Men, 2 sections in both of those books related to divine providence and diseases. I want to move then to the laws of social order are 8 in number. Social as in things that we do with other people. Some of these seem very religious, some of them seem very civil.
Whose laws are they?
These are from Doctrine of Charity number 130. See at the top of the screen there. Okay. Social order requires that there shall be what is divine among people. How's that taken care of? Ministers, the church, the priesthood. We are called, I felt called, to come into this ministry to provide that you hear the word of the Lord and that the divine be among us. Not that I control the divine among anybody, but you certainly are hearing the word of the Lord when you come to church and listen to any one of the ministers, and also teachers who teach the word, and also parents who teach the word. Also anybody in the church who provides a leadership from the word or provides an example from the word. But primarily it's talking in society of ministries. It talks about ministries and functions, and I'll get into the 4 different categories. That there shall be justice with them. Who provides that there shall be justice in society? The government, courts, yeah, judges. That there shall be morality. Who are the moral police? Yeah, right? So you kind of look at that and go, okay, so who's supposed to provide that there be morality in society? Moms.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Moms
So,
and moms.
yeah, and if you look at conjugal love and the passages and teachings around conjugal love, not just from that particular book, but especially that the conjugal be present in society. In marriages, we're told that women are the receptacles of conjugal love especially, and that men receive it by means of them. So there is just that function of the feminine that is a reception of conjugal love in a unique way that the masculine isn't. That there shall be the necessities, I skipped number 4, that there shall be industry, education, and orderly conduct. Who's in charge of making sure that happens in society? Pardon? The law? Industry? They regulate law? Education? Orderly conduct? This gets into policies of our civil government. So you might have a socialist government, you might have a non-socialist government, you might have a communist government, you might have an anarchist government, and various ways industry, education, and orderly conduct are managed in various communities of people, tribal, that there shall be the necessities of life. Yeah, I always mispronounce it. Is it memes or mems? You know, those little posters people make that show up on your computer have a, personality memes. And the one was of a politician saying something. The other was a response by a talk show host. The politician's statement was, nobody working 40 hours a week should be living in poverty. And the reply from the commentator was, and they wouldn't be if you didn't give people working 0 hours a week their money. Right.
No, I meant people that are in these camps trying to get out of bad countries. You think they have the necessities of life?
No.
They're in hell.
Refugees.
Yeah, there are so
Thank you,
many,
that's the
so
one.
many people who are living without the necessities of life. So often, Gwen and I turn to each other and go, well, that's a first world problem. We're worried about, dog food, or not that, just bad example, not even my dog. Can we afford the repairs on the second car, Wi-Fi, our cell? Look at what we have that really aren't real necessities. Jared, you had your hand up.
Oh, I think I was going to comment that according to this passage, people lacking the necessities of life is disorderly.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. In a well-ordered society, yeah, the necessity of life ought to be provided. And 4 or 5 places in different series in the writings talk about that it is one's responsibility to provide for oneself the necessities of life. One place says, according to the social life in which they find themselves, and how the Commonwealth or Big Brother or the government or the nanny state or the welfare state take care of the individual depends on what country you're in, right? I love driving down the street and seeing these signs that tell me to buckle up my baby's car seat. And I think, oh, the nanny state at work, reminding me to be a good daddy. Part of me is a little bit cynical about being reminded to do things by the government. And the other part of me goes, I guess enough people are that daft that it's just important. It's kind of like rumble strips. Really? I guess enough people have tipped over on the corner that you gotta, to the lowest common denominator. And there's something I need to work on spiritually when I get upset that I see the government doing this and that. But I'm still alive, right? We all have little things about the politics and the government of our societies that get to us, whether our political party's in charge or not. That there shall be material for the support of occupations. Again, I can ask who's in charge of making sure those things are there. That there shall be protection. Well, obviously, the military state.
That material for the support Board of Occupations makes me think about student debt, student loans. How are these young adults supposed to get anywhere in life? They're not being, it's a messed up system somehow.
It's amazing. I mean, I'm not an expert in economy or politics, and you probably can tell that. But what we do know about the disparity between the very, very rich and the very, very poor and the middle class kind of being very few populating the middle class, because a lot of people are really poor and a lot of people are really rich. I don't really know what the numbers are. I'm not. But it's not working as well as it could, right? It could work a lot better. Talking with a young man recently trying to get an apartment in Etobicoke. He's single, he's in his 30s, and how easy, how affordable is it? We know, if you bought early in your 20s or 30s, whatever, back in the day, you're probably more or less laughing because of the economy and what happened to your house when you went to sell it. But for the poor guy trying to get in now, I don't know, maybe he should move to Fergus. That there shall be protection, yeah, the government, the society should be protecting us on some level. And what's the opposite of that? That society itself is a huge threat. So all those movies you see advertised, I'm sure you never watch any of those movies that are showing the dysphoria, the zombie state, things like that. But they're out there. There's something in our North American psyche that is buying that over and over again, or else there wouldn't be so many movies being produced about that. There's something, even though on one level it looks like things are okay, there's something eating away at us because there are certain things that aren't protected. The angst about our wealth or our occupations. And finally, number 8 says there should be a sufficient wealth because from this comes all the former necessities. And we're not talking spiritual wealth. We're talking natural wealth. This passage is not talking, I'm sure there's a spiritual sense to it, but overall we're talking about this is how society ought to operate. From the beginning, at the top, there should be what is divine, there should be morality, etc., education, and right down to the necessities of life. And if I talk a great talk about charity and love and faith, and I don't do anything, I think one of the epistles says I'm a clanging cymbal with basically just empty sound. So if we're not practicing what the writings tell us about our social responsibilities and the order of society. So,
Michael, the sufficiency of wealth is a long understood term, one that's used. And so much rests on that a sufficiency of wealth is the ability to deal with what you do have. There's a wide variety there. There's all kinds of people just don't do well with what they've got. And there are other people with a whole lot less, but wisely know how to plan it out.
So that comes back up to the education. People should be educated to know how to just manage basic life skills. Yes?
And it is obviously related to your attitude and the whole being aware of when your problems are first world problems, etc. You can choose to be bitter about how poor you are, or you can choose to rejoice in how wealthy you are without getting any more money.
Yeah, I need another closet because my shoes take up so much space, and I'm just deprived. And can't we just complain in ludicrous ways like that about what's going on in our lives and realize it's really not a problem? Yeah, you can only wear one pair of shoes at a time. These 8 requirements, so this paragraph is taken from a study by Gilbert Smith, presented at the ministers' meetings in 1919, the end of 1919. And so when I was wearing my poppy and thinking about what was happening in 1918, and the study that had been done around this subject by Gilbert Smith. I'm not knowledgeable really about much related to Gilbert Smith. That's not one of your relatives, is it, Ursa? No, no. Thank goodness, no. So anyway, right after the First World War, there were a bunch of different studies. One related, there's a green book, and I can't remember its name. Maybe Jared or Jim can help me out here. Justice and Social Relations by Cranch. I think a little bit later that was written. But a lot of people have been trying to study, Raymond Cranch, trying to, I think it's Harold's dad, but I'm not positive. People trying to understand how best to apply the teachings of the Second Coming to social life and political life. So this study, I really enjoyed it. He was taking these 8 requirements from Doctrine of Charity 130, and, well, you'll see what he does. These 8 requirements are called the goods of use to the Commonwealth. They are the things which make up social order. They comprehend all spiritual, moral, civil, and physical life. Do you think so? Was there something missing in those 8 things that I mentioned? Education, yeah, it doesn't. Just that morality shall be among them. Yeah, overall, there wasn't any one thing about children. And physical life. All the laws of divine providence and permission have regard to these several requirements. But how are these social requirements to be provided for and maintained? They are provided and continued through the uses which individuals perform and are divided into all the works of 4 departments. The 4 divisions are called ministries, functions, offices, and employments. Those 4 things are directly out of the writings in terms of talking about social functions and whatnot. I didn't do all the quotes from the passages from the writings that talk about them. The 4 classes of individual use to society are roughly analogous to the 4 essentials in the economy of the human body. In other words, health, purification, nourishment, and protection. So let's consider these 4 departments individual social use. So he gives a quote from Heaven and Hell 531. The laws of spiritual life, the laws of civil life, and the laws of moral life are delivered in the 10 precepts of the Decalogue. The first 3, the laws of spiritual life. The following 4, the laws of civil life, and the last 3, the laws of moral life. The laws of civil and social order are therefore involved in the middle 4 commandments. Honor thy father and mother, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal. In these 4 precepts, the laws of social order are fully contained. I'm not sure I completely agree with him, but overall I'm going, okay, I'm going to share that with my class tonight. The first law which we have adduced must be provided that the divine must be among men is involved in the command to honor father and mother. And obviously there is but one God, don't worship other gods, don't take the Lord's name in vain, honor the Sabbath, those first 3 laws of the Decalogue. But the 4th one in social relationships have to do with honoring the Lord among people as our spiritual father, and therefore honor father and mother. The second law, which we call the conjugal law, and that's where the law of morality was mentioned. Who's in charge of that, right? Is obviously involved in the precept, thou shalt not commit adultery. The third law, to the effect that there must be useful work performed by everyone, is involved with the command, thou shalt not kill. Scratching my head at that one, but if you read the article, and I can give you the link to it, you see where he comes up with that. Obviously, you're not taking away somebody else's livelihood or killing their reputation or killing their ability to be on earth. So you provide that useful work can be performed. And the 4th, that there must be a sufficiency of wealth, is clearly involved in the commandment, thou shalt not steal, and obviously thou shalt not covet. Reflections on that. Have you heard that before? Have you ever seen it broken down that way? You ever reflected upon the way society operates and the 10 commandments that way? You think the Rise Above It course brought you some enlightenment relative to such things?
This is all Gilbert Smith's...
Yeah, this section after the introductory 24 passages is a clip out of Gilbert Smith's 1919.
You mentioned Cranch, Reverend Cranch, Raymond Cranch. I can remember him Richard, well, maybe you wouldn't remember that. He came here during the 40s. In the summertime, he'd come and he'd do a stretch. I mean, you know, to give the local minister, I guess, some summer holiday. It was sort of a thing. Every
Right.
summer we'd see him here or there then. And I sort of had something in the back of my head from somewhere that he was considered a socialist in his own particular
Right.
way, and obviously he had a lot of thought behind him from this kind of material. And of course, I guess it was seen with some somewhat askance, because in the 30s and 40s, and I guess in the 50s, any kind of socialism was confused with communism. And of course, he certainly wasn't a communist.
Yeah, heaven is run as a communist state overall. Yeah. But to try to get human beings to operate that heavenly, it's just, no. So just looking at these four categories, reading this page here. The first law, that ministries, adequate provision of the divine among men. That just makes sense. Second law, that government functions, the inculcation, the observance of the conjugal law, which can at least be reflected in the laws of marriage. That was 1919. It ain't so today. In my humble opinion, conjugal love and the laws of marriage are not upheld the way I believe they ought to. But, oh well. The third law requires through offices and businesses a worthy service from all and some good use to the commonwealth. Try to provide that there be useful services. Just went down to visit our daughter Cara in Woodstock, New York, trying to open and run her little small business, and thinking, oh my goodness, what a challenge for anybody to try to operate with all the complex laws. I mean, we have the same thing trying to operate a school with all the complex laws nowadays compared even back to 1919. But they were beginning to deal with these huge monopolies and breaking up of all these trust laws. I'm not a historian that way, or a social economist or whatever it would be to understand those things better. But to think that big industry coming in, it made a lot of people really wealthy. And the church, as a result of John Pitcairn's involvement in industry, has a lot more money than it would if he weren't one of those people that happened to get in on the ground floor or on the caboose or whatever it would be to make it wealthy. And they work really hard. Are those opportunities still available the same way now? Who was I talking to recently? I think it was you, John, about when you open up the paper as a new graduate-aged young man in your 20s, list after list of a decent job you could get that could provide for you. You know, it was there. Pages. And now our kids are struggling, our grandchildren are struggling to pay for their student loans and just get a job with their degree better than only serving at Starbucks or flipping burgers at McDonald's or whatever. Yeah, you got to start somewhere, but it's not the same. So we're in a tough economic time, and we're in a very tough spiritual time. This should cheer you up, right? The fourth law requires through the productive employments a sufficiency of wealth, which also means just compensation for every good use. This, we believe, should form at least the four corners of a spiritual social platform. That's the statement of Gilbert Smith. There's so much. I tend to get cynical. You probably know that about me, about various things that are so out of proportion with the things related to the church. The cathedral to Nike. Nike was a goddess, of the Greeks, not just a brand. But the cathedrals all around the world to entertain us in our sport. And that's not a new thing. The gladiators were fighting in coliseums, long before football, baseball, hockey were invented. But when we think about how we're so natural, right? We're such natural people, and we love our natural entertainment. And it costs us in church things. And I suppose if I could be as entertaining as a football or a hockey game, there'd be people flocking to see me. Do what I could do to really, get your blood, pumping and your heart thumping. And but we're told specifically not to do that in our preaching. We're not supposed to be leading by means of the natural in and of itself. Now, perhaps sports, I've missed the part where it's really a spiritual thing. There are obviously very spiritual people involved with sports. No question about it. But it's a game. It's a game. Nothing wrong with it. And because of our natural environment and because of, the way our society is set up, it's difficult. Yes, Jim? What are you thinking?
I'm just thinking what you need is two pastors, and they would bat back and forth.
Abbott and Costello.
Competition.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
guys are gonna end up like the national three talking
Right.
to each other
Yeah.
instead of out here.
Well, and we do have people that are much better at that. The people that are managing off the left eye, people who have they're much better at doing that sort of thing, and capture people's attention and entertain with. There's nothing wrong with natural delight, and if you watch those videos, you can be very delighted with what people are doing, and it's about spiritual things. It's possible that the slow growth of the new church is due more than we think to the general state of disorder on the mere social and economic plane. This again is Gilbert Smith in 1919. And it is possible that the growth of it may be greatly accelerated after the Lord by some divine means now in progress has brought a better social order out of the confusion we now behold. Well, Gilbert, I don't know how I could say that it's actually gone anything but downhill from 1919 overall. But, folks, educate me. Tell me I'm wrong. And even if I'm right, that doesn't mean that the Lord's not at work. Because the things of divine providence, the natural man in me can look and go, oh, everything's gotten worse. And in fact, perhaps it's gotten better. It just doesn't appear that way. Isaac said to Abraham, his father, okay, I better close without getting into this whole section, because it's 8:30 and I've been talking for at least an hour.
You talk about the social in the background there, the social disorder and things. Well, part of the reason we don't have churches that grow is because when we had kids and things, there wasn't 100 things to do on a Sunday, so I'm not sure, and we came to church. But when you have choices, or people have to work, or some people always worked on Sundays, but all the stores are open now, the church is way back in the bottom of people's lives of choices.
Right.
I think Gwenda told me years ago when you were out in Minnesota, that pretty well, or wherever you were, that there was nothing else to do, then they came to church, but that wasn't their top priority because they hadn't been used to a full-time minister. Correct?
Yes, they were surprised that we were offering church every Sunday. You want a resident minister? Guess what? We're going to have church every Sunday. The commandment isn't honor, what the commandment isn't. You know what it is.
I was also thinking about my sister when you were talking about years and years ago when she was still teaching, and she's pretty many years ago. She said, how can I compete? And that was when television was much slower than it is, less than all the machines we have today. But she said, I've got to stand on my head to get the attention of these kids because, they go home and they're glued to Disney or one of those things, and they've got animation, and I can't do that.
Right, and now the televisions are computer screens, and the computer screens interact with everything you can possibly. Gaming is huge. It's so awesome what you can do with virtual reality and gaming. Not that I know anything about it, because I always crash my Mario, and I'm about 30. Pac-Man, Mario, I'm about where I'm at. 30 years behind. So I wanted to close with this passage. It's out of the Arcana reading that our Arcana group is looking at right now in chapter 22. It's the sacrifice of Isaac by Abraham, the Lord bringing Abraham to the mountain which would become the place where the temple was built. And you probably know the story fairly well. He's told to sacrifice his son, his only son. And at one point, there's an exchange between father and son. And it's said to be an exchange between the divine and the divine human. A conference or a conference or a conversation with the Lord, within the Lord, from love. You see the red. And from the affection that is in these words as being from love on both sides, that the Lord is coming up to and has been preparing himself. The whole beginning of the chapter is the preparation in the divine providence that the Lord did for seeing this state through. And it's, Genesis 22, but it's also the Garden of Gethsemane. It's also the Lord in the wilderness 40 days. It's a general thing, but especially the Lord sacrificing himself is depicted or predicted in these words. It talks about how 4 different times he said. It just means this is an intense conversation and discussion going on within the Lord. Abraham said, because Isaac said, I see the wood, I see the fire, but where's the lamb? And the word for lamb there is just, where's the little one? It's not lamb itself. It's where's the little one of the flock? All having to do with innocence. And the answer that Abraham gives, or the divine is giving, is that God will see for himself when predicated of God foreseeing and providing. So it's, again, it's about divine providence. It's related to a permission. The Lord is using this permission of human sacrifice prevalent in the mind of the people at that time. Abraham would have been tempted because people around him did that. He would have thought that if God's really with me, he might ask me to do this. Oh, he did. Not surprised. And also, the temptation the Lord has that there's nobody able to receive all of this truth and goodness that my sacrifice, my coming, will provide. Where are those who can be sacrificed? Those from the human race who are to be sanctified. Were there any? Would there be any? So when we look out from a perspective of having the Word, we think about what we know from divine providence, about divine permission, about leave, goodwill, pleasure, all the things that happen in the world. We think about the state of the church. We think about our own spiritual state. And we may come to a state of despair that things don't look very good. As a matter of fact, none of this is going to amount to a hill of beans. After we're all dead and our kids are all dead, will the Olivet church even be here? Will this building be bulldozed like the old church was, and there'll be an old folks' home instead? We can't know. And we also can know that if the Lord's working in your life, if you're listening to the Lord, if you're receiving the innocence and the love, and you're being saved and you're being reborn by doing your spiritual work, it was all worth it. It was worth it for your parents or for your relatives or for our forefathers, spiritually speaking, to have been here and to have done what we've done. We should know the Lord never predicted that the new church was going to take off in North America. Where did the Lord predict the new church would take off? Among the Gentiles. And people can say, well, we got a lot of Gentiles now. Look at the statements that are made about divine providence. People don't even know about the Lord in some places, even in our own continent. So I didn't want to just depress people with talking about permissions. But I want us to reflect upon what the Lord is providing for us, and that we can't see it all, and the Lord provides through permissions that are very negative, that His will can continue to be done, that something good is going to come out of all the things that we see around us. And with that, I'll stop talking, and you may ask some more questions, or if it's too late, I might let you go.